Today we're talking about Section 8 rentals in Tampa Bay and wanted to give you guys some insight to how we think about working with Section 8 and some pros and cons, right? So as investors with rental properties, the biggest, killer to cash flow is vacancies. And one of the big benefits that we've experienced with Section 8 rentals or, subsidized housing in general within, Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater is tenants often renew and stay in the property for a long time. So I don't have necessarily data to support it other than what we see internally, but the renewal rates and the length of tenure from a resident that's Section 8 as opposed to, just sort of a self-paying, without subsidy is drastically longer. So that's one benefit. Another benefit is guaranteed rent. So all through COVID, all the time, those payments come in like clockwork, twice a month. If they're set up, it's always going to come in within that first week. If for some reason you onboard a new resident that's Section 8 voucher, it could come in like the middle of the month. So that's a huge benefit. We've seen some residents, not many, but Section 8 will even pay up to 100%. Typically, the resident's paying somewhere around, let's say 30% of the rent, with the rest coming from the housing authority. And, you have the ability to renew and, get the increases for rent renewals as well. And another benefit would be sometimes, at least in the market now, you may even get a little bit above market rates. It just really depends. But we have seen some properties where it's, essentially getting rented or the rent's higher than some, basically a different unit in the same complex. So it depends on renewal rates, depends obviously when those residents started versus other residents, how long they've been in the property, how the renewals have sort of worked out over time. But traditionally we've had pretty good luck with renewal rates, paying pretty good market rates for the properties. One thing you want to keep an eye out for on the housing authority websites too is that sometimes they'll have a pay scale. So you can just go to the local, Tampa Housing Authority, whatever it is, and search their pay standards. Usually by zip code and by bedroom is what matters most. That's sort of how they allocate it. And you want to make sure that you're sort of keeping an eye on that over time as it could change. But the amounts there will show utilities included. Obviously for, say, single family house, you want the resident to pay the utilities. That way, if there's a large water bill, it's sort of on them to deal with, not you. So those amounts do include utilities. We might back out 100, $200 or something to get a rough idea of what they're possibly going to pay for market rates. I believe they do have a calculator for that as well on their website where you can sort of get an idea of how they think about the utility usage and how that might change if you do not include it. And then for multifamily properties, water, if it's multiple water meters, you're fine. But if it's one water meter, you might have to have that included as part of the deal. There are more inspections with Section 8. So obviously they have to do an inspection before a new resident moves in to pass it to make it, meet the quality standards. Nice thing is you can actually see their full presentation or PowerPoint of how the whole system works on their websites. And the checklists are usually there. So you kind of know what they're going to look for. It can be a little bit more than like someone would need on a typical rental. So you may have a little bit more upfront work on making the unit rent ready or the property rent ready. You may feel like some of it's kind of picky stuff that you may not typically have to do to get a resident moved into a property. So that's one thing to keep an eye out. Throughout the years, they'll do periodic inspections, and usually, resident will just let them in and do it. But another challenge with the platform, obviously those inspections, there's timelines on them if they fail for a certain item. And if you don't fix it fast enough, and fail again a second time, the property can go into abatement where they hold rent completely from you. And another challenge with that is they'll fail the property for stuff that's tenant and owner responsibility. So obviously with that dynamic is resident fails for something, you don't really want to leave it up to the resident to, one, you don't know how quickly they're going to fix it, the quality of the repair. So we typically recommend using a vendor, fixing the tenant responsibility issues, and then billing them back for the repairs, as long as the lease states that some of that, the repairs could be billable back to the tenant and as additional rent. So that way they feel forced to actually pay it. And that way, that's going to be your best bet to make sure that you comply and get it into compliance so it doesn't go into abatement. So we talked about guaranteed rent payments. Housing counselor information is usually typically pretty easy to get. Sometimes they have limited hours, so there's some communication, it can be hit or miss, getting them moved in, but they are only usually typically, responsible for the rent or a piece of it. They're not usually paying security deposits. They do have some ability to help if a resident moves out and does a bunch of damage to the property. But overall, we're fans of it. Our properties, meet the standards for Section 8 rentals. And so we typically, want to be posting those on the main website. It used to be called Go Section 8, but now it's called Affordable Housing. And that's where most of the rentals sit, where you're sort of advertising them for additional Section 8 residents. And any of our properties, residents can apply for Section 8. There's usually certain sort of price points and stuff that we see a little bit more activity from people interested that have vouchers. And vouchers going to sort of state, kind of bedroom size and amounts and stuff that they can afford or that they're approved for. And so it's something that we look to do as often as we can if it comes up, but we always try to just do a selection process for residents on first come, first serve. So, we don't do only Section 8 marketing even if an owner is interested in it. We say, hey, we don't want the property to sit vacant for a long time because it obviously kills the cash flow. So whoever comes first serve, first best, first come, first serve, and whether they're Section 8 or not, like we're going to entertain it. And there's other programs too that we work with, rent assistance, Catholic charities, different programs and stuff for people that can get, one-time rent assistance, something that's ongoing. Section 8's, pretty much through the life typically of the resident. They do, I believe, annually recertify the resident's income as well. So over time, the resident's responsibility percentage could change. But there's other organizations that might pay for the first year, then nothing after that. So there are some other programs that we work with to try to help people find housing. So we are proponents of it. Most of what we come across is residents already Section 8 in the property when we take over. We've done some placement where people have reached out. And one downside we haven't talked about too is on a new resident moving into a vacant unit, there can be a little bit of lag time with the paperwork process, the back and forth, resident having to do certain things with the paperwork. Usually we see it at least a couple of weeks longer than a typical resident may have, which sometimes could be part of the resident just not doing what they're supposed to. Could be slowness on the housing authority, but I would ballpark an extra 2 to 4 weeks of vacancy probably to get all that stuff moved in just to be conservative, or all the stuff that you need to do. So it just depends. And then we as property managers will go once a year to get to the orientation. As an owner, if you're self-managing, you're supposed to go once a year. But your property management company, if you hire somebody, will be doing that. So you're not like forced to go to the housing authority. It's a good thing to do. Even twice a year. It's an hour or two where they do a formal presentation, and it just gives you sort of a refresher on the program, changing some of the inspection stuff that they're doing. So any new updates you would get there as well. But like I said, at least Tampa Housing Authority keeps a full deck of the PowerPoint on their website, so you can just go through and get access to it. So we're a pretty big fan of it, of the program. You have the guaranteed rent. There's can be some dynamics where they're really treated as any other resident. So if they fall behind, late payments, the evictions process, all that stuff is no different than a resident that is just paying without a subsidy or without being on the program or the vouchers. There's a big need for housing for sure. So there's a long wait list, and it's like a golden ticket. Somebody's not going to want to lose that voucher. And like I mentioned before, I think one of the biggest benefits of the program, other than the guaranteed rent, is the average tenure of the Section 8 residents. They just stay a long time in the property, which is great, right? Like, we hate vacancies. We want to keep people in the residence, staying there as long as we can. Secure cash flow for the owner. And so, yeah, we're huge proponents of the program. If you have more questions, want to reach out about it, always encourage you to also just sit through the orientation with that local housing authority.